Welcome to Shaping Stories, a Glass Artist podcast. Will you introduce yourself? What's your name?
Hi, my name is Kristina Logan.
And where are you from, Kristina?
I am from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, on the seacoast of New Hampshire.
And did you grow up there?
I didn't grow up here. I grew up more in the northern mountains of New Hampshire, but I call New Hampshire my home.
And can we skip the glass part of your life for a moment? Can you tell us what you enjoy outside of glass?
Oh, outside of glass. I love being outside. I love hiking in the woods. I love anything, to do with nature and the outside. I'm a little passionate. My new side passion now is learning how to tan animal hides and make leather with bark and without any chrome or chemicals. So I'm a tanner right now.
Wow. And when did you get started with glass?
I started with glass after I went to college. So I got out of school and I was working in a cafe, and totally by chance, somebody walked in and he was working for Dan Dailey, who's a really well-respected glass artist, and Dan was looking for more studio help. And I didn't know anything about glass, and I walked into his studio and I ended up working there for 4 years, and I learned a ton in that process. So that was sort of that was the beginning. I guess that was in 98, 98, 97, 90, 97, 98.
So you began in the hot shop.
It was interesting because he had all his pieces were being blown out in Seattle, and they were being brought back to New Hampshire, and his studio had a metal working shop and a really intensive cold working shop. So I sort of started with cold techniques, nothing hot. There was no flame working either. So I, could assist somebody in the hot shop. I couldn't blow glass, but I could be an okay assistant. But everything after that, all the cold working production, sandblasting, enameling, that was sort of where I learned for the first 4 years.
Where did you go to college and what did you go to college for?
I went to the University of New Hampshire, and I went into the art program. So the lineage is, many people in my family were artists. So it was like, oh, I want to make things with my hands for a living. And so I decided to, study art. And they had a really small program at UNH, but the thing that I loved is the professors that I had were kind of at the end of their career, and they had all this wisdom and they were really into like foundation skills. So we had really strong like drawing from the figure and all 4 years, and you know nothing with color, but it was all form, and I studied sculpture in particular. So I got a fine art degree in sculpture. Nothing to do with glass.
Yeah, but it wasn't so much derailing. You already had that art focus, and then you just happened to be working at a cafe, and somebody walks in and helps you kind of push you into the glass medium.
Exactly. And when I worked for Dan in his studio, I really didn't think that glass was my material. It was like at the time I felt like it was too shiny and it was too colorful and it was too bright. Um, Casting interested in me, pâte de verre casting. How could I, take cast parts and then put them onto the wooden figures that I was making? Like, you know, how could I make glass something that was my own? And then sort of at the end of that 4 years, I saw somebody flame working. And I'm like, oh, you can actually do hot glass by yourself, like in a little studio, because I had a little studio. So I started noodling around, Somebody gave me, regulators. I invested in a torch that was $169 and people gave me glass and I just sort of, you know, played around with it. And I'd carry the little beads in my pocket and they were all misshapen and I was so proud of them.
What else did you learn from working with Dan Dailey? Did you just mostly do like assist him and do the art side of things? Did you help him with like photography or advertising or any of the other aspects of being an independent artist?
That's a great question. I think what I learned most in Dan's studio was the attention to detail and kind of the relentless search for making it right. Like he would do drawings, and there were many assistants at the time doing different aspects of his work that he would come through and, make sure everything was going in the direction he wanted. And, we were all really good technicians. And we all really, nothing came out of that studio that wasn't, you know, really well done. Really kind of as much as we could, perfectly made. And it wasn't because Dan was being really, um, pushy in that direction. We all just had sort of this common ethos of, making things as the best we could make them. And I really loved that. It was nice because it was a super small studio, so we got to see the production from, from the drawings to the making, and then things being shipped off to galleries and learning how to package glass so it can be shipped around the world and not break, and you know, hearing that aspect of it. I also did some freelance work for some other glass blowers and go to craft shows and see that aspect of, selling your work and making a living. And, that came at sort of a different level with different people.
And you worked for him for 4 years, right? And that sounds like it was a very collaborative space. And now you work by yourself. Can you talk about that shift that you made?
That's again awesome to think about. It was funny because, not funny, in his studio, when I started, there are maybe two or three of us in the basement of his house. And then he moved to a larger place that had this beautiful barn that turned into the studio. And by the time I left, there were maybe 9 people there working. And it did teach me that I just want to work by myself. And it's not because it was anything negative there, but I like to touch all the aspects of my work more. I learned that, in a larger studio, when you have somebody designing and then all these people working for you, you don't get to touch all the aspects all the time. And that's fine if that's what you want. But I think inside of me, I am such a hands-on maker that I love to touch all the aspects. Like, and that's what I wanted. It made me feel almost like there was ultimate freedom also. Um, Instead of thinking that, oh, I always have to come up with a design in order to keep like the machine of the studio going and keep everybody busy. I'd rather just, you know, have that quiet. What it means also is that I make fewer pieces in this lifetime.
Did did you make a big leap or to work for yourself, or did it happen really slowly over time, or was there a pivotal moment that everything shifted?
When when I was working for in Dan Dailey's studio, my car was worth like $500 and my rent, I had an apartment with 2 other people. And I had just gotten out of school and, in New Hampshire, I probably didn't have insurance on my car and I probably didn't have health insurance, so it was this really easy way to make a living. I didn't have a lot of overhead. And so when I started making beads on the side and like going to a little bead show, all that money kind of went into my pocket and I could pay for my needs, my food, my shelter, my car. And So I would say it was more of a gradual process. I could work fewer hours for somebody else, the more I could work more hours for myself and just kind of make sure a certain amount of money came in per month. It was kind of like this little hand to mouth. And I did a lot of production beads early on. Like I knew like, okay, if I'm going to go to a show, if I make this many beads, I can pay the rent. And, eventually I had rent and I had a studio. So I was paying rent on the studio and rent in the apartment. And then eventually I bought a house because I put that together and so I just sort of like kept on, going along that way.
Did you take bead making classes or are you pretty much self-taught from that beginning point?
When my first bead I made was in 1990. I don't think there were any bead making classes. There were none, Somebody showed me, somebody was making, I was at Pilchuck Glass School taking a casting class, and there was somebody who was making beads at night. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to see that. So I was like leaned over their shoulder and I'm like, well, can you show me? And they're like, yeah, you can see this. And then, go off. And so it was really from being around a lot of glass and seeing it done on a really large scale. Making beads at a torch was just small scale version of that. And in 1993, I went to the first gathering of the Society of Glass Bead Makers, which is now the International Society of Glass Bead Makers. And I saw other people working, and I'm like, oh, you can do other things besides put dots on beads. Like there are other things you can do. And look at the way they hold this, and look at the way they melt this, and just looking and studying ancient beads. And that's how I learned. I never took a class. So I'm always telling people to just jump in, you know, play around. There's no rule. You don't have to make it a certain way. I mean, there are rules around safety and, taking care of yourself around glass, and compatibility, things like that.
And can you tell us a little bit about your studio setup as it is now?
Yeah. Um, for 18 years, I was in the basement of my house, which is an old house with an old basement. But now I have this beautiful studio. It's my partner, Michael Graff, designed it and built it. We took down an old garage that was here in our backyard. And so it's 15 feet by 30 feet. It's all Eastern white pine. And I have a torch set up, and I have windows I can look out. And then I have a main central table that usually ends up being sort of my setup table. I can put out beads, I can design jewelry. It can be other things if I need it to be. It can be a big drawing table. And that's in the center. My original idea was to have it for classes. I can fit comfortably four and squeeze in maybe one, six. But I've taken over the studio, so I really don't have room for teaching in this space anymore.
And are you running on an oxygen concentrator or do you bring in bottles?
I prefer, if I have a choice, I prefer bottles of oxygen. Um, I do now have a concentrator that I like quite a bit because it gives enough purity. And I'm experimenting with a system now that will use the oxygen concentrators to fill my oxygen tank, that system, through Bradshaw oxygen. So I'm experimenting with that, and I'm hoping that that will be um, something that I'm, happy with and can run my torch. I run right now a GTT Lynx, but I like to say I can make all of my beads on any torch. But I like the small size of this torch, and I like the really fine flame. But as far as teaching goes, I really like teaching on a minor bench burner.
Yeah, a GGT can be pretty hard with the soft glass, right? You're just used to that.
It can, I run it pretty cool. I guess, as far as flames go, I use just enough flame to do the job. So there's not like a lot of extra flame that I'm working with.
All right. So are you completely making all of your income with your glasswork?
I am. And I've done that from that early stages, working in somebody else's studio. And then when I started to, make enough money from my beads, I would like do a little freelance job or help somebody go to a craft show and then make my beads. Or I worked catering, for a while, and I would have a catering gig, and then I could eventually, do enough shows to, pay the bills I had. And and even to this day, when I say I bought a house, I was fortunate to, get one that wasn't that expensive, that had an apartment down below. And so I rented that apartment, which pretty much paid the mortgage. And, it's been kind of like this hand to mouth, but I've survived by making work for a living. And I'm proud of that. I mean, even having kids, I have two kids, and when they were little, I made a lot of production beads and I made a lot of earrings, and there are times when you're like, oh, do I have to make, you know, this work, and where I might want to make, larger work, but I don't know if the larger work will sell. It still kept my hands in it. It still kept my mind busy. It still kept me in the studio. It still kept me working. And I find that, I don't know if other artists feel this, but when you're working, keeping your hands busy, that's when my mind can then think and be free. So it's like, okay, I might be doing something mundane. Let's say I'm making, these little mini beads that are, $6 a piece, and I'm making hundreds of them, but I'm dreaming about, the next thing that I want to make while this is going on. And then it feeds off itself. So I feel really good about, it's work. It's, and it's not like, oh, I wait for the inspiration to hit me. It's work. Yeah.
What are the different sources that you use to sell your work, and does that change throughout the year or throughout the years?
Yeah, it does. Um, that that's a great practical question. Let's say in the beginning, I would actually physically go to bead shows. I would jump on a plane and fly to Denver and go to the Rocky Mountain Bead Show. And I'd bring my little box of beads, sell as many as I could, and then come home, you know? And the math usually worked. I made more beads. I paid for the hotel room and the flight. And then I would do those, all around the country. And that was before Etsy existed, before all these other platforms, before the internet. And so when somebody went to a bead show, they were like hungry and they would buy beads. And that kind of shifted a little bit. Um, my work shifted and I started to go to craft shows, juried craft shows, um, which I really enjoyed, the people there, the other artists. So I would go to, like, Boston had a craft show, Crafts at the Castle, and Philadelphia still has the Philadelphia Museum of Art craft show, and Smithsonian down in DC. And there was a period of time where those were great. And it was the same thing. You'd go, you'd sell work, you could pay for all the things, you'd come home with enough money, you could go to the next show. And the last time I did the Smithsonian show, it was interesting because I didn't sell as well, but when I came home and I put all the work online, I sold everything. So, and it's even after COVID, I think people are more and more comfortable sitting at home, on their sofas, clicking and buying. And so over all those years, I was really careful. And I think this is, you know, great advice for anybody starting out or anybody making. I've always been really careful to keep my mailing list. And so even when I was doing bead shows, early on, I would send a postcard. I would like handwrite these postcards and lick the stamp and put the stamp on. And then people would bring the postcard to the show and they'll be like, oh, here you are at booth number 32. And that personal connection. So now, I will put things up online, but I'll send out an email or I'll, really be active on social media to try to keep that connection with people, that human connection, so that they know when the work is available. Um, they can purchase it if they want or just go look at it. Uh, so it's changed. And I used to love to like every month fly somewhere new, for teaching or for, sales. But now I really love staying home. And the connection is still there, even though it's, through our weird devices, our phones and our computers. But, the connections, they're sweet. I really love connecting with people. And I love actually, I'm rambling on, but I love knowing where the pieces go. I feel like I like that usually more than, sending work to a gallery and then you don't know where the pieces go. You don't have that connection to the person who's going to wear it. So I really love that.
When you're selling work, are you selling like finished jewelry pieces or are you selling beads that people make into finished jewelry pieces or a little bit of both?
Now it's a little bit of both. I think in the beginning it was definitely beads. I was a bead maker and people would then just make things from my beads. And then little by little, I started making some finished work. So I'd have both. And it's funny, if you go to like a craft show with finished work, people would come up to me and say, I'd have a little bowl of beads on the side and they'd be like, what do you do with a bead? And I had been in the bead world and it's just like, people are just like, oh my God, beads. It's like buying yarn if you're a knitter, it's just like, what would you do with it? I don't know. You're gonna hoard it and figure out what to do later. But, so I have both still. And I make very small mini beads, definitely once a year, but usually twice a year that people can buy and make into things. And then my larger beads that are more, I guess, collectible pieces, kind of like paperweights or marbles, and I sell those as individual beads. A little bit of both.
Can you talk a little bit about how you organize your day as a self-employed person and how you hit all the different elements? And also, a question that everyone used to like when I asked is, especially when your kids were young, how you organize your day, plus the mom guilt that comes with working for yourself, working from home, making that time, making that income, all of the above.
All of the above. Oh my gosh. So let's go back in time first, I guess. Before kids, I was like in the studio kind of 8 to 8 or 7 to 7 or 6 to 6. I was just definitely in there. And since I was only making beads and not jewelry, I was kind of, and there were no emails at that time. It was just, phone answering machines. I would just glue myself to the torch and on your mark, get set, go, and just go, 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 go. And it did actually induce a little bit of arthritis in my thumb for working that way. Um, and then having kids sort of changed that. I was still the primary breadwinner, and it was still an on your mark, get set, go, but it was kind of like baby's taking a nap. On your mark, get set, go. And you'd have like 45 minutes that you knew. And my studio was a mess during those years because there was no like, oh, I'm going to go clean the studio and make it all nice. It was just get in there. You had a microcosm of, space, do the job, get out of there. And, I even had like a cradle and one of those pack and plays in the studio. And somebody once asked me if I ever baby proofed the studio. And I'm like, no, it was just, I taught the kids like how to pick up a rod of glass without hurting themselves. And, as they learned the phrase, it's a tool, not a toy. That was the famous phrase. And they could use it, they just had to know how to use it. It's a tool, not a toy. Um, so nap times, school times, and all that. My income went down, my productivity per hour went up. I learned a lot in that process. And it was sort of like being on maintenance mode. And then as, the kids grew and I had more time, I could, invest more in the things that I wanted to make. There was another part of that question.
How you organize your day now, doing all the
Yeah.
elements of your job, like social media, making glass, putting together jewelry, cleaning, ordering, all the
I
things.
feel like yeah, the old days used to be so simple. Go make beads and sell them. Now, I feel I I care about the social media aspect of it. Like I care about the connection to people and putting that out there. I enjoy it. So I don't do it every single day, but almost every day, I'll grab my cup of tea. Kids go off in different directions. Still have one at home. So off to school. And, if I get on my yoga mat, that's a good day. Go to the studio, and then I'll kind of cruise around and do a social media post of something that's actually happening. It's sort of real time, things that are going on. So I'll send that out into the world because I don't want to say it's lonely. It's I'm solitary here, so it's kind of like sending a message out into the world, making a connection out there, and then I settle in. Right now, I'm making a series of rings, so I've set for probably a few weeks. I've sat at the torch making beads, and now I've shifted over to the jewelry bench. So now I turn on my pickle pot, sit down, and I'm doing jewelry construction right now. And lunch happens somewhere. If it's nice outside, I sit outside, throw the ball for the dog, and then go back into the studio and keep on going. I now I feel like I have a more balanced life. It's a little bit more, 9 to 5 with a lunch. And if there are errands to run, I run errands. And if there's a day to have off, I get to have a day off.
When you have a new idea, do you draw it out or how do you work through new processes?
I sometimes draw. Most of it is imagination. So I'll really think about, I can see like 3 dimensions in my mind more than I can draw them. So I really visualize them. And then when I want to start to think about how they're going to go together, I use parts. Like I'll have a bead and I'll, put it down on a piece of paper and then I'll draw around it. And I did a series of um, brooches where I photocopied the beads and then from the photocopies cut out the bead, and then I had a very flat 2-dimensional bead, and then I could draw around that. So I like to like almost use it like I'm looking at parts or building something physically, and then I can see it being built. And I really like how things are constructed. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, little rivets or screws or, bezels that hold things. And I get a lot of joy out of figuring it out. So I'll figure it out. Like in the studio, there are lots of bowls and little parts and little cast pieces that I'm for, those of you can see the video, I'll have these, a cast piece and a silver piece, and I'll, put those together, and then I'll think, okay, what kind of bezel do I want to have around that? So I'll take the wire and I'll have that, you know, sitting around. And then if I want to have a bead in the center of it, you know, I'll take beads and I'll put them in the center and, you know, let that sit around for a while. And it's the same way I make necklaces, you know, I'll make all the parts and have them sit there and then do the drawings and they eventually all come together. I like that idea. I'm gonna work on that today.
I love it. Do you ever stop and question everything and think that you're going to completely shift? And how do you get out of that mindset?
Oh my gosh. You know, after doing this for, you know, it's not so long, but for doing it for a chunk of time, my my work, my aesthetic develops really, really slowly. But for me, there are like these moments of like, oh my God, that's totally new. Um, and there's still like the combination of doubt and excitement is always there. Like after 35 years, you know, I'll make something and be super excited about it. And then there's this little feeling of like, is this just crap? Is this just like, is this bad? No one's gonna respond to this. No one's going to be lit up by this. You know, so there's, and I don't know if that is like self-critic, you know, is that the mind tricking you, or is it the mind like demanding the best? So I think a little healthy self-criticism is a great, you know, motivator to making good work. I don't know what good work is, but for your own personal like satisfaction to good work. I from the beginning to now, I go through all of that.
And especially when you're sharing on social media or even back in the day when you're meeting people in person, how did not everyone's going to be receptive to your work, right? How do you handle that in addition to what's going on in your mind?
That's tricky because um, you know, I'm sensitive. You know, I don't have the thickest of skin. So I think maybe the way to combat that, or the way that I've always approached it, is I just make the work that is, you know, speaks the truest to me. You know, how can there be any like criticism in that? Like, I'm not trying to sell work. I'm trying to make the best work I can. And if people respond to that positively, then I'm thrilled. You know, if they go as far as buying it, then that's great because then I can, you know, pay the bills. But even just, you know, enjoyment of it. Yeah, I just try to make what is the truest that I can possibly make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And do you have tricks for resetting your mind? Say you came up with something new and you're really excited about it, and then you start doubting yourself. How do you shift that reset to get back to that excitement?
By making. For me, it's making. So if there's doubt, like if I have an idea, I have a couple big ideas floating out there, and I feel like one of them is more accessible now than the other one. The other one, I feel like it will happen maybe in 5 years, but there's one that I'd like to work on now, which entails making larger pieces for the wall. Um, but there's a little approach avoidance to that. It's like, I'm scared. You know, what will it look like? I can't see it yet in my head. And so making is the best way. So, you know, whether or not it's smaller work I call it like sneaking up on that idea. You know, you can sneak up on it from one side or sneak up it from the other side or make a maquette or do some drawings. But for me, it's action, like physical action in my hands that informs what the next piece will be.
So good. Um, so we went through my whole list of questions. Do you
Yeah.
have anything else that you would like to talk about, or do you have any final words of wisdom for everyone?
I love the questions you've asked. Thank you very much. I can tell that you're a maker. Um, we hit on a lot. I mean, words of wisdom, it goes back to like, and I've heard other people say it, and I've heard other people that you've interviewed say it about, you know, making what is truly in your heart to make. And I believe that it's, and the other thing that I feel like can propel your work is if you make something that you love that really sparks you, then work off of that. Like, how could you make that a little bigger or a little smaller or a little brighter or a little darker or a little less colorful or a little bumpy or a little smooth? Like, keep on working on that idea. So then you have, like, let's say the first one, number one, and you work on that. The next day you have the second one, number two, and then do the same thing. Like, think about it and make a new iteration. And then you go to number three, and then just keep on doing that with your own work. I feel like that way of working, you develop a vocabulary, a personal vocabulary of your work, instead of looking outside of yourself and thinking, oh, I want to make this and I want to make that. And oh, doesn't that look pretty? And let's pull that idea in. I mean, that is a way of working that I respect and admire in other people, but it's not the way that I work. So I've seen lots of people make, like, you know what, you open up magazines or you go up social media and you can look at somebody and you know that that's their work. And it might even be like a departure, but you still know it's their work. It's because they have that little vocabulary that they've worked on all those years. They've looked and changed, looked and changed, looked and changed. And I would I would give that to anybody as advice. You know, just dig deep and look at the things around you that you love and that you make and keep on making them.
I love that. Yeah, that's something I've been trying to work on is not like is just focus instead of like the next shiny thing and you
Right,
is what you yeah.
right. And the next shiny thing is great and it can be all super exciting and you can incorporate that in your own work. But I think somebody's, you know, personal work is never boring if it's really coming from, you know, what sparks you, what gives you that little, woo, you know, excited feeling, that
Mm,
deep feeling.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not losing yourself.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No, you're so welcome.
Yeah. These are all the questions. Like, if I could sit down and suck somebody's brain, these are what I want to
Yeah.
know.
Right. Right. So, right. Yeah, no, you're, that's why you're a good interviewer because you're really asking questions that you care about,
Yeah.
you know,
Um, can you tell everyone where to find you on the internet and
and
stuff?
all those things. Okay. My name starts with a K. It's Kristina. And Logan, like the airport in Boston. And if you just look up Kristina Logan, you can find my website is .com. And if you put glass on the end of that, then you can find my Instagram and my Facebook. And you can also, I have a YouTube channel. Oh, I did that as one more thing I want to talk about.
Mm,
So leaving a legacy of work in the world that's going to survive beyond me. Um, I love to teach and I want to leave a legacy of what I know in the world. So my YouTube channel is that. I worked on it last year. I put a lot of effort in it and it's my gift out into the world to leave a legacy of what I've learned for the next generation or for anybody who, oh, how did she do that? And I'm like, here you, this is how you do it. So tune into that, send little notes,
Love that.
let me know what you think, and I'm gonna keep on, working that as my side gig. So more communication. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 I love that. And more editing and more
Yeah.
stuff. I'm just kidding. Just
Right. What you get yourself into, right?
kidding. Yeah, I
That's,
know, me
ooh,
right
lots of editing.
here. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. See you down here in the studio sometime,
Yeah,
okay?
I'm gonna come visit.
Visit. All right.
Have a nice day.
Bye, everyone. Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening to Shaping Stories. If you like our podcast, please make sure to follow on whatever platform you're listening on. We are always grateful for your reviews to help other artists find us. You can find us on Shaping Stories Pod on Facebook and Instagram. And please make sure to support this artist that we interviewed today. It's a lot of guts to come on here, and we appreciate them being vulnerable and sharing, and especially for their very valuable time. If you know somebody that might like to be interviewed, or you might like to be interviewed yourself, I would love that. Please send an email over to me to dom@terrapinglass.com. I really look forward to seeing you, and I can't wait to continue with this project.